When was the last time you felt powerful? Not busy, not productive. I mean dangerous. Sometimes I watch my sons playing wrestling or superheroes, and in those moments, in their minds, they're exactly that. They're strong enough to lift anything. They feel they can conquer the world with absolute certainty. Romans 8:37 says, "No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us." Unknowingly, do children actually believe that more than us? The thing is, somewhere between the age of 7 and today, we traded anything is possible for let's be realistic. We've traded the superhero cape for a coat of caution. We've been programmed to believe we are small, created by accident, here to just work, pay bills, and die. Today, we're going to look at the psychological and spiritual blueprint of why that is. We're going to look at the story of a man who smelled like sheep but carried the authority of a king. In Psalm 139:14, it says, "I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made." Fearfully doesn't mean scared. In the Hebrew, it actually implies reverence. It implies complexity. It implies that the architect that designed you and I didn't use a random number generator. He handcrafted your psychology. He engineered your personality. He wrote the code of your potential before you even took your first breath. Ephesians 2:10 calls you his workmanship, and that's the Greek for poema. It's where we get the word poem. So you're not a factory defect. You're a masterpiece. But sometimes we can walk around as if we're like a sketch on a napkin. So in 1968, NASA hired Dr. George Land to design a test to identify creative genius. They wanted to find the best divergent thinkers, people who could look at a problem and generate multiple unique solutions. It ended up working for NASA, but Dr. Land got curious and he wondered, is this genius genetic or is it learned? So he took that same NASA grade test and gave it to 1,600 children between the ages of 4 and 5. 98% scored as creative geniuses. That means genius is the human factory setting. That means we were actually born with it. But then they tested the same kids 5 years later at age 10. The score dropped to 30%. By age 15, it dropped to 12%. Then they tested 280,000 adults, just 2%. Dr. Land's conclusion was simple but scary at the same time. Non-creative behavior is learned. We are educated out of our genius. You didn't lose your power. You were programmed to forget it. This is why the world's advice to grow up is actually wrong. Growing up usually just means learning how to doubt. There's a reason Jesus didn't say, unless you become like a CEO, you cannot enter the kingdom. He didn't say, unless you get a PhD, you cannot enter the kingdom. He said, truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So why children? Is it because they're innocent? No, it's because children are the 98%. Children haven't learned to slow down or play it safe yet. A child trusts their father to provide. A child believes they can fly. A child believes they can become anything they want at any given moment. They expect anything they put their hand to work. Jesus wasn't telling you to be childish. He was telling you to reclaim your factory setting. He was telling you to get your cake back. So what is the David paradox? Most of us think of David as just a guy who killed Goliath, but that is just part of the story. The real story, the one that explains why you might feel ignored right now, happens way before the giant. So in 1 Samuel 16, the prophet Samuel comes to anoint the next king of Israel. He goes to Jesse's house. Jesse brings out his sons, the strong ones, the ones that look like your CEOs or your influencers. And God rejects every single one of them. Samuel asks, do you have any others? And Jesse basically says, well, yeah, the youngest, but he's out in the field with the sheep. Imagine David wasn't even invited to the meeting. He was overlooked by his own father. He was underestimated by the world. He smelled like manure and dirt. But when they brought him in, God said, "Arise, anoint him, for this is the one." Here is the point you need to get into your spirit. David was a king before he ever wore a crown. He went back to the field that day. He went back to shoveling sheep dung. He went back to being a nobody. But something had changed. He now carried the anointing. You might be working a job you hate right now. You might feel overlooked. You might feel you're in the back of the line. But your location does not determine your identity. Your creator determines your identity. So why do we feel small? Why do we take off the superhero cape? Because we have forgotten the legal document. Romans 8:17 says, we are heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ. Do you understand the legal weight of the word heir? An heir doesn't beg. An heir doesn't stand outside the castle hoping someone throws a crumb over the wall. An heir has the keys to the front door. Let's take Prince William, for example. If he walks into Starbucks, he doesn't need to shout. He doesn't need to prove he's important. He carries the weight of the crown in silence. He knows who backs him. When you enter a meeting, a hard conversation, or a difficult season, who do you think is backing you? If you think it's just you and your limited resources, of course you'll feel small. Of course you'll feel anxious. But if you realize the same spirit that raised Christ from the dead dwells in you, you walk differently. You'll talk differently. We need to stop praying beggarly prayers. Oh God, I hope I just survive this week. No, you are royalty. You have access to the throne room. Start speaking to your mountain instead of complaining about it. Now, we have an enemy. We don't need to spend all of our lives thinking or worrying about him, but it's useful to know his strategy. The enemy does not usually attack you with monsters. He doesn't attack you with obvious evil. He attacks you with identity theft. In John 10:10, Jesus says, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. So what's he stealing? He's stealing your self-perception. He knows that if you were to ever wake up, if you ever became that little child again and put that cape back on, you would be dangerous. Think about David. When he showed up to the battlefield to fight Goliath, what did his brother say? He mocked him. He said, go back to your sheep. The enemy will always try to remind you of your past, to keep you out of your future. He'll whisper, be realistic. Who do you think you are? You're not qualified. Every time you agree with him, you hand over the power. You take off the crown and put on the shackles. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Fear is not your native language. Fear is a foreign language taught to you by a liar. It is time to break the agreement with smallness. You're not a victim of your story. You're the author of a new chapter. God is handing you the pen, but you have to have the courage to write something bold. David didn't wait for permission to fight Goliath. He didn't wait for the army to agree with him. He looked Goliath in the eye and said, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty. He didn't need to bring a better weapon. He brought a higher authority. He knew who he was and he knew who his God was. As annoying as it can be watching my sons throw each other around, jump off the sofa, climb the walls, playing wrestling and superheroes, I often remind myself, they're not crazy. They're connected to the source. They remembered something we as adults have forgotten. What is the giant in your life right now? Is it fear, debt, addiction, mediocrity? Stop tolerating it. Isaiah 60 says, arise, shine, for your light has come. It doesn't say, wait for the light. It says, arise. The world is desperate for people who are alive. The world is desperate for people who know their identity. Because when you know who you are, you give other people permission to remember who they are. Stop acting like the shepherd boy in the field. Remember the oil on your head. You're dangerous. You're chosen. You're royalty. Put the cape back on.